Chapter 2. Southern Sudan today. Naya put the container down and sat on the ground. She always tried not to step on the spiky plants that grew along the path, but their thorns littered the ground everywhere. She looked at the bottom of her foot. There it was, a big thorn that had broken off right in the middle of her heel. Naya pushed at the skin around the thorn, and then she picked up another thorn and used it to poke and prod at the first one. She pressed her lips together against the pain. And now we are in Southern Sudan, 1985, with Salva's story. If you remember, he had left school when the war came to his village and was running into the bush as far as he could away from home. Boom! Salva turned and looked. Behind him, a huge black cloud of smoke rose. Flames darted over its base. Overhead, a jet plane veered away like a sleek, evil bird. In the smoke and dust, he couldn't see the school building anymore, and he tripped and almost fell. No more looking back. It slowed him down. Salva lowered his head and ran. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, and then he walked. For hours, until the sun was nearly gone from the sky. Other people were walking too. There were so many of them that all of them couldn't be from the school village. They must have come from the whole area. As Salva walked, the same thoughts kept going through his head in rhythm with his steps. Where are we going? Where is my family? When will I see them again? The people stopped walking when it grew too dark to see the path. At first, everyone stood around uncertainly, speaking in tense whispers or silent with fear. And then some of the men gathered and talked for a few moments. One of them called out, "Villages, group yourself by villages. You will find someone you know." Salva wandered around until he heard the words, "Lonarik, the village of Lonarik, here." Relief flooded through him. That was his village. He hurried to the sound of the voice. A dozen or so people stood in a loose group at the side of the road, and Salva scanned the faces. There was no one from his family. He recognized a few people, a woman with a baby, 2 men, a teenage girl, but no one he knew well. Still, it was comforting to see them. They spent the night there right by the road, the men taking shifts to keep watch. The next morning they began walking again. Salva stayed in the midst of the crowd with the other villagers from Lonarik. In the early afternoon he saw a large group of soldiers up ahead, and word passed through the crowd. It's the rebels. The rebels, those who are fighting against the government. Salva passed several rebel soldiers waiting by the side of the road. Each of them held a big gun, but their guns weren't pointed at the crowd. Even so, the soldiers seemed fierce and watchful. Some of the rebels then joined the back of the line, and now the villagers were surrounded. What are they going to do to us? Where is my family? Late in the day, the villagers arrived at the rebel camp. The soldiers ordered them to separate into 2 groups, men in one group, women and children and elderly in the other. Teenage boys they considered were men, for boys who looked to be only a few years older than Salva were joining the men's group. Salva hesitated for a moment. He was only 11, but he was the son of an important family. He was Salva Maywen Dut Arik, from the village named after his grandfather. His father always told him to act like a man, and to follow the example of his older brothers, and in turn set a good example for Kahul. Salva took a few steps toward the men. "Hey!" A soldier approached Salva and raised his gun. Salva froze. All he could see was the gun's huge barrel, black and gleaming as it moved towards his face. The end of the barrel touched his chin. Salva felt his knees turn to water, and he closed his eyes. If I die now, I'll never see my family again. Somehow this thought strengthened him enough to keep him from collapsing in terror. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The soldier was holding the gun with one hand. He wasn't aiming it. He was using it to lift Salva's chin so he could get a better look at his face. "Over there," the soldier said, and he moved the gun and pointed it toward the group of women and children. "You're not a man yet. Don't be in such a hurry," he laughed and clapped Salva on the shoulder. Salva scurried over to the women's side. The next morning the rebels moved on from the camp. The village men were forced to carry supplies, guns and mortars, shells, radio equipment. Sava watched as one man protested that he didn't want to go with the rebels, and a soldier hit him in the face with the butt of a gun. The man fell to the ground bleeding. After that, no one objected. The men shouldered the heavy equipment and left the camp. Everyone else began walking again. They went in the opposite direction from the rebels, for wherever the rebels went, there was sure to be fighting. Sava stayed with the group from Lona Rique. It was smaller now without the men, and except for the infant, Sava was the only child. That evening they found a barn in which to spend the night. Sava tossed restlessly in the itchy hay. Where are we going? Where is my family? When will I see them again? It took him a long time to fall asleep. Even before he was fully awake, Sava could feel that something was wrong. He lay very still with his eyes closed, trying to sense what it might be. Finally, he sat up and opened his eyes. No one else was in the barn. Sava stood so quickly that for a moment he felt dizzy, and he rushed to the door and looked out. Nobody, nothing. They had left him. He was alone. I want you to think about why they would leave, that group of women would leave a child from their tribe alone in a barn by himself and go on without him. And tomorrow we'll kind of talk about that.